Well, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for coming out. My name's Tom Landy. I'm the director of the McFarland Center for Religion, Ethics, and Culture here at the college. And this is our first event, public event of 2020, of the millennium even. The McFarland Center, over the course of the semester, will be presenting a great schedule of public lectures on 17th century Jesuit architecture in Rome, 20th century Catholicism, on David and Messiah, and the Messiah from the Hebrew Bible to Christian and Jewish tradition, African American theological understanding of the crucifixion, on St. Oscar Romero's theological vision for liberation and transfiguration, on African feminist theology and ethics, and much more. So please see our website or our posters outside for what's coming up. It's like YouTube, you have to get the little ad before you get to watch the video today. So you've got the little ad. Really, though, one of the joys of my work as director of the McFarland Center is that since 2000, I've been coordinator for the college's International Visiting Jesuit Fellows program. And over that time, the program has brought 30 Jesuits here to Holy Cross from all over the world as visiting fellows to spend a semester to teach, to engage with the community, to be involved pastorally. We have one of the great of those 30, the 30th of the 30 here today. Today, I'm happy to introduce this semester's visiting Jesuit Fellow, Father Peter Dubovsky, who will be here all semester. And the lecture gives us a great chance to meet him and to learn a bit about his scholarship through the talk he has to give, Hope in Times of Crisis. Father Dubovsky is professor of Old Testament exegesis at the Pontifical Biblical Institute in Rome. Until recently, he was dean of the faculty there. This is his reward, I guess. Being dean was what he had to pay his sins, whatever those were, and now this is his reward being here at Holy Cross, so for those years. He previously taught Old Testament studies at Trnava University in his native Slovakia. He's author of The Building of the First Temple, a study in redactional, text critical, and historical perspectives, published in 2015, and Hezekiah and the Assyrian Spies, Reconstruction of the Neo-Assyrian Intelligence Services and its significance for 2 Kings 18 to 19. You can see why I couldn't memorize that. I needed the paper for that. He received a THD, his doctorate in theology, from Harvard University in theological studies, Harvard Divinity School, where he specialized in Hebrew Bible. He also holds degrees from the Pontifical Biblical Institute and the Pontifical Gregorian University. But interestingly, as we were just talking about, his bachelor's, master's studies originally in Slovakia were in biochemistry. At Holy Cross, he'll continue his research in biblical studies and his teaching a course called Cultures of the Bible. So please join me in welcoming Father Peter Dubovsky.
Thank you very much for coming, and thank you very much, Tom, for your nice words and kind invitation. So, today's talk, I would like to concentrate on is there a hope when the temple is on fire? Well, let me start with a biblical image. Hope or faith is like salt. Without hope, it's difficult to navigate through life. Nevertheless, hope is very, very fragile and easily dented by numerous obstacles of the human lives. And I think this might be a reason why hope has been a subject of numerous scholarly investigation for the last millennia. And thanks to Tom, I can present you at least some of my results of my studies and investigations. In order to grasp the impact of this, or of what does it mean to be in crisis, allow me to take a biblical image like this. When the temple is on fire, is there a hope? Is there a hope when everything you have is on fire? And as some psychologists say, hope comes into its own when crisis looms. Well, this will be the image, and if the temple is on fire, so everything collapses, and can you really have any kind of hope? So this will be our question. And well, since there are some biblical scholars here, and if I don't start with a linguistic analysis of the terminology, they wouldn't think that I am a serious scholar. So let me start with this definition, semantic fields and terminology. If you just thumb through various dictionaries, one can quickly realize that the nature of hope is far from being clearly defined. Let us present few definitions. So if you, for example, look at the Italian dictionary, speranza è un'attesa viva e fiduciosa di un bene futuro. So it's expectation, a vivid expectation of something. If you look at the Webster dictionary, you will find that the hope is a desire of some good accompanied with at least a slight expectation of obtaining it. If you look, for example, at the French dictionary, it's a sentiment, the sentiment, feeling. If you look at philosopher Snyder, it's a cognitive skill. It's a cognitive skill that allows you to, that demonstrates an individual's ability to maintain drive in the pursuit of particular goal. And if you look at Catechism of the Catholic Church, it's a theological virtue, and hope is you are expecting something after this life, not now. So, and if we look at Emily Dixon, her poem is beautiful, and she says, hope is the thing with feathers that perches in the soul and sings the tune without the words and never stop at all. So I think this may show you that it's very difficult to define hope. And so now let's turn to the biblical terminology. And if you go through all kind of biblical dictionaries and encyclopedia, what we will find? Of course, since you cannot define this word in English, it's very difficult to define in Hebrew, and the semantic ranges did not overlap. So all the words which refer to the Bible, in the Bible to hope, I divided into three groups. So the first group is based on the meaning connected with the idea of waiting, awaiting, expecting something. So you are looking for future in something like this. And these are some definitions. Hope is looking forward with confidence to a future good. In Israel, the hope is founded upon Israel's religious memories in which Adonai, the Lord, the hope of Israel. If you look at the group number 2, it's a very different aspect. It's a question of to feel secure, to trust, to be confident. And in this sense, hope is a more of place, physical place or physical object or a person you can trust on, you can rely on, you can lean upon. Or the third one is connected with this kind of verb like tzafa and sabar, and it means to test, to investigate, to observe. And therefore, the hope is something like a result of a scrutiny. So you do something, really, you investigate, and on the basis of this, you get an answer. And if you have this answer, then you can have a hope. So, if you have these three elements, so let's look at them. So, this one is basically expectation. You are looking forward to something in future, but how? In the Bible, they have in one aspect, first look back, investigate what God or did for you, and then you can look forward. The second one is sort of feeling, I can trust. This is a place where I can be safe, and therefore God is a rock and so on. Or it's a cognitive skill or cognitive process, and as a result, it shows that the way out of crisis, give an answer to an incumbent question. So this is how the Bible defines it as these three dimensions, and we will somehow investigate them. Now, let's look at the crisis. Crisis ahead. Be ready. So probably when I say the temple on fire, most of you may have this reaction. Okay, the temple was on fire. It's clear it's a Babylonian invasion in 586 BC, and therefore this was a moment when the temple was completely destroyed. It was on fire, and the Israelites were deported. Well, if you look at the history of ancient Israel, there were many invasions, many destructions, many deportation, many times when Israel was on fire. And look at some of them. I have chosen only few of them over few centuries. So these are all moments when Israel or Jerusalem temple in one way or the other was on fire. So to have a temple on fire, to be in crisis, is basically a natural part of their life. So what are the investigational methodological steps that we are going to do? A survey of the history of ancient Israel shows that the Babylonian exile was not the first nor the last moment when the Israelites were exposed to devastating wars, merciless deportation, and bloodshed. The wars, destruction, deportation, violence, and burning of the Jerusalem temples naturally raised the question, is there a hope when the temple is on fire, when the city lies in ashes, when the people are massacred? What is the source of hope for a small nation like Israel in the midst of all these disastrous events? How were the Israelites, the clergy, the governing class, and the simple people able to cope with the disastrous events? And I will present 4 of those moments: local skirmishes, Assyrian imperialism, Babylonian destruction, and Persian or Hellenistic freedom, so-called. Then, of course, once you find the answer, you say, yes, this is how the hope is defined. What happened? Well, you have a new crisis, and basically everything collapses. And we have 4 possible solutions, and I will present 4 of them. And you will see each of these solutions basically collapse because of the new crisis. So what you do with that? And so this will be sort of a critique of the solution we have. And then we can go to the next step, saying, okay, a critique of any solution. The temple will be always on fire. Consequently, can there be hope? The repetition of the crisis, new oppression, repeated corruption, and wars brings our investigation to a different level. Can any model of hope become a permanent source of hope? In other words, is each hope doomed to be trashed by a new crisis? So, is there a hope to have hope? So, let's start with the first model. Allow me to present you a couple of pictures. This one. Local skirmishes and the divine anger model. So let's try to move now back to something like 8th century BC. So I will start just to give you a very short historical introduction so that you can get lost. So if you look at this is ancient Israel, and basically the whole in 13th century, 14th, 13th century, everything was divided between 3 major powers. So Assyria, Hittites, and Egypt. And Israel was somewhere here, obviously completely under the Egyptian dominion. Well, then there was a complete collapse. This enormous civilization, which lasted for almost 5 centuries, all of a sudden collapsed. There are many, many different reasons, and this is the results. So many small nations were born, and this is how Israel and Syria, Palestine look like. So you have small city-states, everything crumbled apart, and local skirmishes between the local kings. So you can imagine if you are a king here, so of course you can be invaded by all these small kingdoms, and if you are strong enough, so you can expand. So it's basically like an accordion. I expand, and you have to shrink. I am shrinking, you can expand. So this is a situation in that in that moment. And I will present you two moments. The first is so-called Aramean crisis. So Aram is this kind. So here we are, this is Israel and this is Judah. So how this Aram was expanding and what's happened. So Aramean crisis. So we had one man whose name was Hazael. He was a very ambitious man, very ambitious king, and he was able to resist Assyria. He was one of the few kings who resisted Assyria. And while he was expanding, so this is his kingdom, he was expanding. So basically he covered and took over the whole Israel and even Judah. Now, look at what we can say. So Israel in itself was reduced to pieces, looted temple of Jerusalem, and Judah became vassal of Damascus as well. So temple was on fire. So the first element, what we can see, and this is a description of Elisha. Listen to these words. Then the man of God wept, so mean Elisha. Hazael asked, "Why does my Lord weep?" He answered, "Because I know the evil that you will do to the people of Israel. You will set their fortresses on fire. You will kill their young men with sword, dash in pieces the little ones, and rip up their pregnant women." So this is a description, probably it's a literary description, but it's quite tough what was going on. Then the army was completely decimated. So if you think that the whole army had 50 horsemen, it's almost nothing, and 10 chariots. So even my village I'm coming from was stronger than this one. And you see that he went down and even looted Jerusalem. So this is one of the major crises we have. To complete the picture, I will show you now another moment of crisis, and this is so-called fratricide war. So not only that Israel was invaded by foreign countries, but also they were fighting each other. And this is a moment when we have two kings, Joash and Amaziah. Joash was the king of Israel, and Amaziah was king of Judah. So they started fighting, and there was a war, and at Bet Shemesh, this is the war. And if you look at this stratum, these are ashes. So it means it was basically burned down. And so what we have is a whole description of this, that the city walls were torn down, the temple of Jerusalem was looted, and Judah became vassal of Samaria. And the temple, once again, was on fire. So first, this king Joash expanding, and then there was a war. And once this war, look at this, belongs to Judah. Judah was defeated by Israel. Everyone went home. King Jehoash or Joash of Israel captured King Amaziah and Bet Shemesh. He came to Jerusalem, broke down the wall of Jerusalem from the Ephraim and so on, and looted everything. So you can imagine these were just local skirmishes. Now, what was the source of hope in this situation? So the theologians of that period, they developed a very interesting system, and we can call it divine wrath or reconciliation theology. I will now abuse Michelangelo, but I hope you won't be scandalized. So this would be the element, divine wrath. And of course, you have this poor person there. So what do you do with that? So they develop a very interesting theological model, and the theological model is basically based that you have God like this, and the God could get angry. And once God got angry, oh gosh, everyone was destroyed. And now I have my God here, you have my God here. And once we were in fight, what it meant? That my God was angry with me and therefore abandoned me and led me in the hands of the other God, and the other God or other king could destroy us. And this is, for example, an example we are in Babylonia, 12th century BC, and if you look at it, so At the time, this is good departed and evil was constant. The Lord Marduk became angry and full of wrath. He commanded, and the land was abandoned by its gods. And once the land was abandoned, then you could see the thinking of its people changed. They were incited to treachery, so people were doing bad things. And then there is a whole destruction, and the Elamite king came and destroyed Babylon and so on. So this was an interpretation that God was angry, and therefore this happened. If you go to Moab, close to Israel, you will find exactly the same. There was a king called Mesha in Moab, and he was oppressed by Israel. How they interpreted it? In a very similar way. Omri was the king of Israel. He oppressed Moab for many days, for Chemosh, who was a local god, was angry with his land. And this was the interpretation. So this was a very simple model. You have gods who became angry, abandoned his people, God punished his people, and they have to reconcile with God. And once again, they fell or provoked God, and thus God became angry and so on. So where is the hope here? So you have to reconcile God. But the whole trick was very simple. The God revealed the signs of his anger in heaven. And if you were able to read these signs, then you were able to prevent. If you were not able to read those signs, that you could really be in trouble. So the whole problem was to keep basically God reconciled through various sacrifices, offerings, and so on, and the gods were happy with that. And so this is the model how we find it, that the God become angry and deliver people to Israel to someone else. Then it developed later on. But now, if I look at your faces, you look at me and say, oh, this is a bad guide of the Old Testament. But think about St. Paul, the theology of reconciliation. God was angry and Christ reconciled us with God. You have it there. If you think about the expiation for sins, you have it present. If you think about penance, all these things were born from this ancient, very ancient theology. So this was one model they presented. So if you know how to reconcile God, then you have hope. If you don't, then you can be in trouble. Now, let's move to a different level and look at this. Now, we had two people who were fighting, two local guys. But now we are moving to a completely different level. We have the Assyrian Empire, the first kingdom governing the ancient Near East, and we can compare it to atomic bomb. Now, just to give you, once again, historical background so you can see the expansion and the importance of this. So this is a very small Assyrian Empire. It started expanding with these two kings and became larger, and slowly it became, this was during Tiglath-Pileser up to here, and at the end, this is the final resort. If you think that this was basically the world in that period, so Assyria dominated the whole world. So it was the first serious empire in the world. Now, how they conquered the world? If you think, I will show you a couple of things. So these are chariots they used, and they developed different kind of chariots with 3 or 4 people, so on. And you can compare it to this. So if you have really good tanks, you can move quickly and destroy whatever you want. Well, they develop another elements. If you have fortified cities, they develop a very sophisticated siege machines, and they could destroy any kind of city you have. So it was like shooting rockets to a city. They had special units, for example, divers, who were able to get to the city when the city was surrounded by by water, or they had horses, cavalry. But look at this man. I don't know if any one of you ever been on a horse. There is no saddle. They have just a piece of cloth here. They have no, I have these brackets. They have no brackets and the reins. But can he hold the reins? Because he's shooting arrows. So you can imagine you are on the back of the horse. You cannot hold the reins. And the horse is in the war. So this horse must be so well trained that it's enough for you to touch him, and he must understand whatever you say him. Otherwise, you will fall and you will die. So now, what the Assyrian king says to Hezekiah, who was one of the kings who resisted, and he tells him something like this: do you think that mere words are strategy and power for war? On whom do you now rely that you have rebelled against me? Come, now, make a wager with me, my master, the king of Assyria. I will give you 2,000 horses, if you are able on your part to set riders on them. So, do you have 2,000 riders, those who are able to ride these horses? Well, of course, his answer was no. So, what do you want? Now, let me present it in a different way. Do you know this lady? Probably not. She's the president of Slovakia. And Slovakia is a very small country, about 5 million people. Now, imagine that these two men, they come to her and tell her, and she rebels against them. So, the discussion is now. I will give you, come now, make a wager with my master. I will give you 2,000 jets. Do you have pilots to fly them? Of course, the answer is no. In Slovakia, we have 10 pilots. So what do you do? The answer is, so what do you dare to say against me? So this is the Assyrian Empire. So then they have super sophisticated intelligence services. The first intelligence services in the world. So these are the tablets, how they were presenting. They had inter-system, how they collected information. They double-check it, and everything went to the king, and king got anything what happened, they knew. Then if you go, if you did not agree, this was the result, you lost your head, and these are the reality from Lachish, and all these heads are there. The people were beheaded. The people, this is like they were opening pregnant women if did not agree, or the people were deported there. The whole system, country was divided. And now look at this. You know the pictures. You have the army, you have intelligence services, you have fantastic propaganda, and if you don't agree, this is the question. So who is right, who is wrong? And my question is, where does your hope lie? Can you trust your local God? If you have God of the empire who basically dictate what you have to do. So all this wrath theology or God's anger theology collapse, because now you have one God who is extremely strong, you are small, and therefore there's no way this man will decide what will be your future. So what is your hope? Just to collaborate. And in this moment, as you can see, the whole, this is the Assyrian king who basically kills the wild animals, and the wild animals are often representing the other gods. Now we have Isaiah. Isaiah was one of the most genial men of the Old Testament, and he came with a fantastic solution. He says, "You Assyrian, the rod of my anger, the club in their hands is my fury. Against a godless nation I sent him." So what basically he says? He says that the God of Ashur or Assyria is not in command. There is God of Israel who uses Assyria to punish Israel. And so what they say, they're boasting themselves what they were able to kill all these people and conquer all these cities. He said, well, that's true, But shall the axe wound itself over the one who wields him? So the axe is Assyria, and the Lord of Israel is the one who wields him. And the soul magnifying itself, and so on and so on. So it means Assyria will be punished by its time. So, and who is my God? Is a God of history. So he is governing the whole history. So if you trust this God, you have really hope for your future. But there is a but to this. You have this man who is Habakkuk. So this was a perfect solution, and it was taken over by many nations. And if you are under the oppressive regime, as I was, this was really a very good solution, and it's still a good solution. But if you have this man, Habakkuk, he was a rebel. And what he says, let's look at this. So he said, oh, look at the situation, what's going right now. It's terrible. Everything is a disaster. It doesn't work. So he is complaining to God. Now, there is the answer of God. Oh, don't worry. I am the Lord of history. I will send a nation who will punish Assyria, and there will be the Chaldeans, meaning Babylonians, who will come and destroy Assyria. But now, so far, this was a perfect answer. But now, what he says, O Lord, have you marked them for judgment? Your eyes are too pure to behold evil. And so, you have made people like the fish of the sea, like crawling things that have no rule. The enemy brings all of them up with a hook. He drags them out with his net. He gathers them in his seine, and so on. So, what does this mean? That this new tool, this solution, it's even worse than the previous one, because the Babylonians were even worse than the Assyrians. So is it the solution? And I personally excavated in Ashkelon, and this is a result of what happened there. It was a complete destruction. They destroyed everything. They were even worse. So is it the solution to that? And so can you trust your God when his temple is on fire? So it will be once again on fire, and this is a solution, but in fact, it's not a solution. So now there was another solution developed by the Israelite theologians, and look at them, who were them? Deuteronomistic, we can call it Deuteronomistic theology, or Deuteronomistic basis of hope, treaty model, just king observing commandments of the Lord. So in the ancient Near East, we have treaties. So the kings were related by treaties. And having these treaties, you can see, so these were the treaty between two kings who were equal like Shalmaneser and Marduk-Zakir, or Shumi, so the Babylonian king, or Yehu, it was this one, and this one was a big one. So you can see the difference. So you can have different kind of treaties. And this is how it happened. So on the basis of this treaty, it means there was a relationship. As a god was and king was related to his people or to another king, so they have some rules. I observe them, there are pluses. I don't observe, there is a war, or there is a blessing. And the same was for God of Israel. So they made a treaty. If you observe these rules and these commandments, everything will go okay, and if not, then there will be a problem. So, but who is this God? This God, this partner of the treaty, is not a simple king. He is the Lord of the universe. He was the one who was able to bring his people out of Egypt. So he was stronger than the strongest kings in the world, meaning the king of Egypt. Therefore, if you observe the rules, commandments, you have hope that this God will protect you. Now, if you look at it, it was these are all the blessings you will get. He will bless the fruit of your womb and the fruit of your ground, your grain and your wine and your oil, and so on and so on. So there will be a lot of blessing if you observe these commandments. So this is a real source of hope for you. Well, once again, also this one has its own cracks. What are the cracks? So first, we can think that, if God is really observing these rules, then who are you, a human being? Who of you have never sinned? Who have not make a simple mistake in your life? And if God's relation with the people is based on your behavior, and you as a human being is unable to stand to observe all the rules, then what is the hope? And the result is that we have even the most just kings, like this is Hezekiah. He became sick, and we know that he was not able to observe all the rules, and therefore there was not blessing for him, and he was cursed by the by the sickness. Or there is another king, Josiah, who was one even more just than Hezekiah, and he was killed. So not even the best kings in the world were able to observe all the rules. So then, you have a perfect model of hope, but since we are unable to stand on that level, then the hope is gone. But this model, of course, you can find it, for example, in sacrament. It still continues around the world. So now let's move to the last model. If you have a treaty, and God can, he can close one eye, second eye, third eye, fourth eye, fifth eye, but in a certain moment you made such a mistake that he said, that's enough, and you have to go to a jail. So something like this happened, that it was enough, and they said, it's enough, you go to exile, and the treaty is over. And here we have a new model which was presented by the king, by Daniel, and we can call it mercy and compassion model. If you look at this, it's enough to read part of this beautiful prayer. It basically says that now we are in exile. We committed sins. We made a problem, please forgive us, but forgive us on the basis of what? If it's on the basis of a treaty, the treaty is gone. It was destroyed, doesn't exist anymore. So, on the basis of what? But have mercy with us according to your goodness and according to the abundance of your compassion. Compassion in Hebrew is rahama. It's something like when mother or father feel certain compassion or movements here when they see a child suffering. So it's not a question that I have to do it because I am mother, so I do it because it's part of me. It's more than a simple duty. So it's based on this compassion, and the compassion is a part of divine nature. And if we look at the background of this ancient Near Eastern background, so we can find that there were gods who were the signs, who were the gods of compassion. So it was part of the God's nature. So you forgive us not because we deserve it, but because you are God of mercy. Well, is there any problem with this? And maybe you know this man, it's Nietzsche. Who was contesting many different things. Well, the first thing is, if God is merciful, then why there is still oppression? If doesn't depend on my behavior, your mercy, then how is it that there are new crises, and why this continues? Why the temple is once again on fire? And I will present you the picture of this man, Job. And this is an inner biblical dialogue. Job basically revisited the old retribution model, and you say, well, you suffer because you have sinned. But Job said, well, yes, but is there a proportion between my suffering and the sin I have done? I don't think so. Then he said, they say his friends told him that, the revisiting so-called Old Testament model of testing. So as God tested Abraham, so you are tested, and we can see whether you are really a good person or not. He said, well, but look at my family. My children are dead, so is this enough? Or revisiting so-called God teacher, that you are suffering and this temple is on fire because I want to teach you something, and through suffering you can learn something. And I said, well, but isn't it too much for me? Is this really the way how you want to teach me something? And then the answer is, I had heard you with my ears, but now I see you with my eyes. What does this mean? It means that he had an enormous mystical experience with God, and this mystical experience brings him to a completely different level, and he can understand now why this happened. It makes sense. But it's not the question that I understand why, but I feel that God loves me. So this is an answer. But then you have Kohelet, and Kohelet brings everything down. Even this doesn't work. So even the model of mercy doesn't work. And now what you have, they are going back to the old schools, old style. We need something to be sure that this is a way how we behave. And if we behave well, or these are the models how we have to behave, these are the rules. And the last books of the Old Testament are basically Maccabees, who are willing to die because observing the laws. Because this model of mercy worked up to a certain point. Or wisdom, Ben Sirach, or then move it to apocalyptic and so on. So even this model, it collapsed. So now, if you look at the conclusion, or if we think about some possible conclusion, so the devastations, wars, violence, cried and still cries for answer. The scribes compiling the Old Testament propose several models how to cope with the political and human crisis. The first model leaned on the theology of divine wrath. And this means how to reconcile angry God. A variant of this theological model found its way to Pauline thought of reconciliation, and later it was woven into expiation for sins theology. This model of hope underwent different modification. The Deuteronomistic version of this model was grounded in the covenant theology. To keep the commandments and observe them became a way towards well-being and prosperity, and consequently the real foundation of hope. Daniel, built upon previous theological reflections, anchored hope in divine mercy. Another model explored in this paper assumed that the Israelite God was the only sovereign God of history. According to this model, any difficulty or crisis was not accidental, but it was part of divine project. These models echoed in the theology known as history of salvation. As illustrated on these examples, the Old Testament foundation of hope proved to be insufficient to grasp the very nature of hope. In sum, none of the models was able to give a satisfying answer. Each time when the temple was on fire, a theological basis of hope collapsed. This conclusion can be expanded even to the present and the future. Each time when the temple is on fire, a theological basis collapses and will collapse. Therefore, can there be hope when each model of hope proves to be transitory model? Is there a hope to have hope? On the one hand, all these models were and are still and will remain a source of human hope. We cannot just trash them. On the other hand, all these models were, are, and will remain a source of human being hope. None of these models fail completely, but only partially. On the other hand, these models teach us that the hope is, in its nature, is far from being reached by human beings. Hope, and let me is a bridge to be constructed by one generation and demolished by the other. And let me finish with this image. Hope is like a music. One generation writes the lyrics, a next generation composes its scores, the other generation performs it, but no generation owes the music. Thank you very much.